How's it going, everyone? Welcome to this week's Q&A. So like any other week, if you want a chance to one of your questions being answered, make sure you drop a comment down below and I'll either answer it in that question itself or in next week's Q&A, or make a dedicated video for that question down the line. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started with the first question of the week. And it is, what is the service interval for a evap canister, a EGR valve, and ignition coils? So for all three of these items, there's no real X mileage or time or anything like that that you need to be replaced. So some reasons why you may want to replace these things. First of all, charcoal canister, only in the event of a flood or some sort of an impact do I really see them failing. Now, can they fail? Sometimes, yes, absolutely. Do we see them failing on a consistent basis? Absolutely not. Like I said, most times we see them failed is because they are filled with water. Sometimes they'll be cracked from an accident, but typically it'll be filled with water. So other than that, you could go 200, 300, 400,000 miles, unless if it gives you an issue without changing it. So for the EGR valve, so most new cars do not have an EGR valve anymore. They do the EGR effect with overlap with the camshaft. So if you have an older vehicle, it could build up some carbon. Some Hondas had issues with carbon, not particularly the valve itself, but the port from the valve to the intake manifold, and would need decarboning. But the valve itself doesn't need to be changed at X mileage unless if you have some sort of a flow or a lift coat. So like I said, this is common on older issues with the carbon. Newer Hondas typically do not have EGR valves anymore. If they do, again, you don't need to change them at X miles unless if it gives you an issue. So ignition coils, depending on how they fail. So for instance, if one fails at like 40,000 miles, I wouldn't go ahead and change the full set. Although if one fails at 200,000 miles, then at that point, I would probably go ahead and change either all four or all six, depending if you have a 4-cylinder or a V6 at that point. Now, again, if one fails early on, you could just change the one because it's probably just sort of a defect or an early failure. And I necessarily wouldn't go changing all of them. Also, if it's covered on warranty, they're just going to change the one coil and not the whole set, unless if you chose to pay out of pocket for those other coils. So with that being said, hopefully that answers that question for you. All right, so this next question is, some person got their head gasket replaced on their 1.5T. Now, you guys know, if you've been following me for a while, that I am not a fan of these 1.5Ts. We have a ton of head gasket failures. We are diagnosing probably 5, 6, 7 a week at my dealer. Now, some people decide to do them. Some are covered. Most are covered by warranty. Some aren't. We see them failing between 40 and 80 to 90,000 miles, generally speaking, and typically on the Accords, 9-to-1 on the CRV and the Civics combined. So Accords tend to fail a lot more than the CRVs and the Civics. Again, typically between 40 and 80 to 90,000 miles is when we see them failing. Sometimes, once or twice we saw them fail earlier. A couple of times we've seen them fail with 100, 120, 140, whatever the case may be. Now, the question is, if I replace my head gasket, how much longer will the second one last? So if it's covered under warranty, Honda's only allowing us to do the actual head gasket, not bolts or anything like that. So my issue with that is those bolts are already stretched, which is part of the reason why that head gasket initially failed. So again, we just change the head gasket, make sure the head and block are nice and straight, they're not warped. There's a limit. If everything falls into place, then we just replace the head gasket. So being that the bolts are reused and the head and the block aren't 100%, even anymore, because there is, a tolerance that Honda allows you to not be able to resurface it, small tolerance. But in my opinion, that small difference is only going to make the second head gasket fail even sooner. So again, if you're paying out of pocket, I would probably get the head resurfaced. The blocks typically don't, warp or anything like that, but they could, but typically don't. We also check for cracks and stuff like that. But if everything if everything is set and good and we just do the head gasket, then in my opinion, we haven't seen it yet. I've seen one come back about 50,000 miles later. I don't remember the original failage miles. But yeah, I think in theory that the second one should fail quicker, considering that you're reusing a bolt and you have a bigger void than you normally would on a brand new engine. So hopefully that answers the question for you. All right, so the next question is, what does Honda and Acura's maintenance algorithm actually calculate? So I looked into some of this information. There was nothing real specific, although it does mention engine and transmission operating temperatures with throttle percentage being calculated into that as well. So very generic, very basic. If you've been following my channel for a while, you know I'm not a fan of it. Some of these oil changes go about 10,000 miles, which is ridiculous. I'm actually doing a test on my TLX right now, but I anticipated going about 7,000 to 8,000 miles before it the light triggers on for the oil change. Now you guys know that my TLX is modified, and that's something that it will never calculate. So that's something you have to keep in mind if you are modifying your vehicle, and it's really only calculating for exact, you know, the way it was designed from factory, stock output, stock power. So keep that in mind. Even if your car isn't modified, you should still be changing your oil and your fluids on the earlier time, especially if you're investing in this vehicle. If it's something you bought, you financed, whatever the case may be, you just want to protect your investment, and spending 100, 200 hours more a year on fluids is only going to work to your benefit down the line. So with that being said, hopefully that answers the question for you. All right, so this next question was, this person was selling their vehicle and they were contemplating replacing a time belt or not replacing it because obviously it's at that mileage. Actually, I think it was over mileage at this point, but they wanted to sell the vehicle. They didn't want to invest in it if they were going to sell it. So I'm okay with you not doing it, although something especially like that if it breaks, it could cause catastrophic damage to the engine. If you're selling that to a person, you should absolutely let them know, because they have the right to know if they need to do some maintenance when the vehicle is being purchased on their end. Also, if you are replacing it, you could use that as leverage to say, well, I'm asking this amount because I just spent, here you go, here's a receipt at the dealer or at my mechanic replacing the time belt, the water pump, you know, whatever, X, Y, and Z. So now if it's just brake pads or whatnot, then obviously they're probably going to look and they're going to be able to tell that they're going to be needing to replace pads soon. Although, you know, if the pads start to wear out, the indicator should squeal and they'll know and they won't cause any further damage. So it really depends on the situation. But if you also have service history records, that's great for somebody that's serious in buying your car, and they'll know that you treated it correctly or incorrectly if you don't have maintenance minders or maintenance records, right? So you could also use that as leverage, you know, depending on the situation, and try to get a little bit more for your vehicle, or at least know that you're selling a sound vehicle and that you have nothing to hide. So hopefully that answers the question for you. All right, last but not least, question of the week. And once again, if you want a chance to win your questions being answered, make sure you do drop a comment down below. So first part of the question is AGM battery. And this will go for any batteries, AGM, lead, lithium, whatever. Anything specific that needs to be done, and not really, you just want to be cautious. You want to disconnect the negative first and then the positive, install in reverse order, positive first and then negative, to avoid causing any unwanted issues with you coming in contact with the positive and the ground. So second part of the question is the memory saver. So this is a tool that we used, we used to have them back in the day. We don't really use them anymore, but just to keep everything from resetting. Like I said, I haven't used it probably in about 10 years or so. But if you do use it, it's okay to use it. It'll keep your clock at least and your radio from losing memory. Not such a big deal nowadays because they don't need a code anymore for the radio. But, back in the day when I started with Honda, every radio had a code, and sometimes we weren't able to retrieve that code without pulling out the radio. So obviously we wanted to be cautious, and, we didn't want to go through extra work if not needed. Now, if you don't have one, if you don't use one, it's okay. Change the battery. When you turn on the vehicle, yes, there's going to be all sorts of lights on the dashboard, and that's very, very normal. So don't be alarmed if you change your battery and you start your vehicle and you're like, all right, what's going on here? All you have to do, drive it around for like a block or two. Sometimes you may have to cycle the ignition on and then off and then on again, and drive it a couple more blocks, and it should reset everything. All the lights should turn off pretty much all at once. In some cases, it may take a little while, but generally speaking, that's pretty much the scenario. We replace the battery, we start it. You can either clear all the codes with the scan tool, or you could just drive it, a block or two, and typically the lights work clear by themselves. So with that being said, I'll catch everyone on the next one.